Welcome, everyone. It's Dr. Lindner. We are going to start with Anatomy and Physiology 1. And let's give a brief description of what anatomy and physiology is, right? We're taking the course. It's important to know what is anatomy and what is physiology. And very simply put, when we talk about anatomy, we're talking about structure. When we talk about physiology, we are referring to function. And that's why many of the anatomy and physiology books, sometimes they are called form and function, because another term for structure is form and then function. Now, we can look at human structure in a variety of ways. We could see it with the naked eye. We can also look at structure under a microscope. We can see structure on x-rays and MRIs and CAT scans and ultrasounds and all forms of diagnostic imaging. Physiology is the study of the functions of these anatomical structures, how everything works together. And that's what we're going to be learning about, whether it is at the chemical level, learning about carbohydrates and proteins and fats. Those are all from the molecular level, they all have different structures. And based on that structure, a carbohydrate is going to function differently than a protein. And a protein will function differently than a fat. The heart functions differently than the stomach. All right, that's based on different structure. Something else we're going to be talking about is looking at the human form, is that we need to look at different references, different reference terminologies, and we'll go through these. Like if we're talking about the arm, it's the brachium, and if we're talking about the palm, it's palmar. And if we're talking about the bottom of the foot or the foot, it's the pedal foundation. But everything has to be in reference to this position that this young lady is standing in. And this is called anatomical position. Notice her feet are flat on the floor and the palms are facing forward. And the pinky is medial and the thumb is more lateral. So we will go over those terms, medial and lateral, in just a little bit. Okay, but anatomical position, very important. In that anatomical position, remember her hands were at her side and the palms were facing forward, feet flat on the floor. Now there's other terms called supine or prone. Supine and prone, these are both lying down, but supine is when you're face up and prone is when you're face down. So an easy way to remember that is supine is when you're lying on your spine, right? And if you're lying on your spine, then you're face up. And prone is when you're lying on your bone, and that would be your nose. So if you're lying on your bone, your nose, you're face down. So supine and prone, you should know those. Now this has shown up on a lab quiz on one of the McGraw-Hill Connect lab quizzes in the past, and it showed this person lying face down. So what would be the best answer? Is it anatomical position? Nah, we can cross that out. Is it fetal position? We didn't speak about that. That can't possibly be. And now we have to decide between these two opposites, right? These are good distractors. They're opposite. Supine, remember, is when you're lying on your spine, and prone is when you're lying on your bone. So this answer would be prone. Very good. This one was also on one of the past Connect McGraw-Hill lab quizzes. And it's like a drag and drop. So you have all these possibilities off to the side and these empty boxes, and you would click and drag them. So if we start with the middle one first, well, we know that that's anatomical position. We know they're standing upright and the feet are flat on the floor. If we look here, supine, they're certainly lying on their spine. We know it means face up, and supine is the opposite of prone. Prone, they're lying on their bone, which is the nose. They are lying face down, and of course, it's the opposite of supine. So make sure you feel comfortable with that, okay? When we talk about anatomy and physiology, when we're studying the cells, when we study the cell, we call that cytology. Whenever you see the word cyte, C-Y-T, it means cell. So if we're talking about an osteocyte, well, what type of cell do you think an osteocyte is? Osteo means bone, so it's got to be a bone cell. If we see another cell called a cardiomyocyte, well, that's a heart muscle cell. If we hear of a chondrocyte, chondro means cartilage, it's a cartilage cell. If we talk about a hepatocyte, hepato like hepatitis, hepa means liver, it's a liver cell. When a bunch of cells come together and they form tissues. The study of tissues is histology. When women go to their um, gynecologist and they go for a pap smear, a pap, right? Pap is named after the Greek physician George Papanicolaou. So they took his Greek name, Papanicolaou, and they took pap. And a pap smear is when they slough off the tissues within the vaginal canal and the tip of the cervix. That's basically doing a biopsy, right? They're taking a tissue sample, they send it to a histologist. A histologist studies tissues. Now, you heard me mention cells and you just heard me mention tissues, but cells are made up of a bunch of chemicals that come together, whether they are the atoms like carbons and hydrogens and oxygens and nitrogens and phosphorus. When these things come together in a particular manner, even chemicals create a structure, right? This is DNA. It's the structure of a double helix. Structure determines function. So when chemicals come together, whether they're carbons, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, the way they arrange themselves, maybe it's a carbohydrate, maybe it's a protein, maybe it's a fat. When these chemicals come together, they create cells. And when cells come together, they create tissues. And in another lecture next week, we will talk about tissues, and there are four types of tissues. There are four types of tissues. There is epithelial tissue, there is connective tissue, there is muscle tissue, and then there is the neuron. So there's epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. We will talk about each of these four types of tissues next week. Okay, but just want to lay down some foundational words so that you're familiar with it when you hear about them again. When these tissues come together, tissues create organs. In this particular example, we're looking at the stomach. When you have the stomach and other organs that work in harmony together, they create a system. In this particular case, we're looking at the digestive system. We see the stomach and the small intestine and the large intestine and the pancreas and the liver. These are all digestive organs working together to break down your food properly. When we have the digestive system and the 10 other systems working together, now we have an organism. So let's take a break. We'll see if there's any questions. When we come back, we'll talk about the 11 systems.